Hi, welcome to the Upside. This is the show where we talk about all the good things that are going on in Long Meadow and sometimes not. But and I don't mean that. My guest today is Mark Gold. Mark, thanks for coming in.
My pleasure, Paul.
We're going to talk about just some of the things that are going on in town and you know, some of it's budget season right now in the town of Long Meadow. But we'll talk about some different things. So first of all, and we'll get this out of the way, Mark, how long have you been on the board?
7 years.
So we served together for 6 years,
Right.
and you're in your 7th year and you're up for re-election.
Correct.
So you will be running again.
I will
for
be
the
running
select board.
again. I've put a little note in the reminder in the Long Meadow News trying to explain to people why I was looking to run again. I think there's still work to be done, and I'm interested in running for re-election.
Okay, and the psychoanalysis hasn't come back yet. It's to say you're crazy again, but that's all right. I know I've been in that position, so good. I'm glad that you're running again. I think that you add an asset to the town that, in a way of thinking, I think on the board that we need. So. And
Appreciate
it's always
that.
good.
Thank you.
Oh no, it's always good to have, you know, you and I have had some issues when I was on the board in terms of disagreeing, but you can appreciate someone looking at something from a different perspective, and you know, as long as you're talking about it intelligently and not yelling at each other, that's a good thing. So,
Right.
All right, so we're talking about the budget. You're in the middle of, right in the beginning or middle or end of budget season, however you want to say it. I mean, you've had the budget presented to the board, and what are the big things that are going on that people should be aware of, that if there are big things going on?
Right. So there was a budget directive sent out by the town manager to the school committee and department heads, and asked everybody to come back with their budget. And the budgets have now come back, and when they came back to the town manager, they were a little bit more than a balanced budget, which means they weren't a balanced budget, and the town manager made some adjustments. And the major adjustments were internal to what we call the town side of, which is the non-school side of government, but also there were some adjustments to the school department's request. The school department came in with a budget that was, it's about I believe $350,000 to $400,000 more than they were suggested that they come in at. Much of that has to do with their desire to have all-day kindergarten. There are other issues, I think, that have to do with the overall budget, but clearly that's one of the things that they would like to encourage the town to adopt. And one of the potential ways of funding that would be to make adjustments on the non-school side of the budget. And I think people need to understand that the school department budget is about 65% of the overall budget. You know, the overall budget being somewhere around $65 million now, and the school committee budget being a good portion of that. But there are aspects of the budget that are related to the school department that aren't in the school department budget. For example, benefits for all employees. We pay medical benefits for all the employees out of the common side of the government, which is not the school department's budget. It goes to the general government. We pay debt service out of the common side of the government, not the school department. So debt related to everything from sewers, storm sewers, particularly street projects, and school buildings like Long Meadow High School are all in the town side of the budget. But so too are benefits, and one of the not so pleasant surprises this year is preliminary numbers for medical benefits is going up more than we would have liked them to go up. We'll get the final numbers in the next day or two, but it's potentially possible that they could be a double-digit increase in our medical benefits. So we still have to work out the difference between the town side and the school side. And we have not seen that in a very long time. Scannick Valley's been very, very good in terms of the system that we have that's a cooperative medical plan. But I think we're going to work it out. Unfortunately, though, the town manager has recommended to us, to the select board so far, a budget that, in order to put together his budget, which is balanced, compromises on 2 or 3 of the policies that the select board's tried to establish. The first policy was a policy to try to periodically and systematically increase the amount of money we put toward infrastructure improvements. We call capital project spending, and we try to take it, we think of it as or budget it in terms of the number of dollars as a percentage of tax revenue. So if we were 2.5% of tax revenue last year, could we go to 2.25% or 2.75% of tax revenue this year? That would be one thing. We're not going to be able to do that potentially. The second one is to increase our contribution to a fund called OPEB Liability Fund. OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. It's essentially medical benefits for people who have retired from the town of Longmeadow. Those benefits we pay for out of ongoing expenses. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of a $31 million obligation if we had to fund it all today, for, put it into a fund and pay for it out of the fund. Instead, we pay as we go. We spend $1.5 million a year for our share of the medical benefits.
Right, and this is not retirement benefits. These are the medical health insurance benefits of folks who have retired from the town of Longmeadow.
Right.
Right, just so people understand. It's not, the retirement benefits are already set aside. We're okay with all that stuff,
well,
for the most part.
The Hampden County Retirement Board puts them aside, right. You're right, these are our medical benefits. And the bonding agencies who look at the town of Longmeadow, people who may be familiar with Detroit and other areas that have had to default on some of their bonds because they had excess obligations. The bonding agencies look at, are you funding, or are you setting up a fund so that long-term your obligations are taken care of? So we created this fund several years ago. We put nominal amounts of money into the fund. There's only several $100,000 into a fund that has an obligation of $31 million. We tried to increase that amount of money every year. We may not be able to do that. And the final thing that, beside our capital plan and our OPEB, is that the select board was trying to not increase taxes at the full 2.5% maximum allowable by Prop 2.5. Excuse me. And we had asked the town manager to put together a budget that only used 2.25%, and that's not likely to happen either. So right now we're in the midst of how do we balance these policies that the select board would like to do with some requests from the school committee for increased funding, primarily for all-day kindergarten. Yeah. Long answer to a short question.
No, and I think, one of the, without talking inside baseball or anything, we can talk a little bit about some of those policies and some of the things. In the last probably 3 years, the town of Longmeadow has had the ability not to go to the full 2.5% tax levy. And what that is, folks, is that if you're not familiar with it, is that under state law, Proposition 2.5, the town will automatically raise your property taxes 2.5% in any given year, because we have the ability to do that. Anything more than that, that's the override thing. But for the last several years, we had the ability to maybe not spend 2.5%, but have funded them. And I think, one of the questions, and you and I have talked about this when we were on the board together, is that at what point in time Longmeadow has 99 miles of roads, right? It's 9 square miles. It hasn't changed in 50 years. Now, some houses have been added here or there. At what point in time does capital become too much part of the budget to where you can't afford it anymore? Meaning, trying to increase it over time, and there's a capacity to only have so many projects in a given year. And I understand the year goes from July to July, and you can do projects in the second half of the year, but my street, for example, took an extra 3 to 4 months to complete. And that's typical of what we see in some of these projects. And is there concern on some of that, about that we're hitting that capacity to really, and most of those projects are not performed by DPW, but they're overseen by DPW.
Well, the DPW also sets the parameters of the project. Now, I think there's no secret that we were without our a town engineer for a period of months, and there are some carryover projects from last year that were funded last year that we have not been able to get to yet, and which we will, but we haven't yet. And so I think your question is a valid question. At what point do you say we should or could be able to take a breather and say we're not going to spend as much capital this year because we physically can't execute the plans? Unfortunately, though, some of the projects we do, like that, and these are projects that are not funded by water and sewer enterprise funds, but so whether it's streets or sidewalks, which we supplement the state Chapter 90 funds, we supplement that with our internal funds for do sidewalks and streets, or storm sewer outfalls. Those get progressively expensive, and so sometimes you're doing the same size project and it is costing you more money. But we have to take a look at that. I mean, if we ended up with a significant backlog of projects it wouldn't be healthy for the town to essentially appropriate money, tax your town your town residents, and then not spend the money. That's not a good way to do
No,
business.
and I think, I think for the last decade to, 10, 12 years, we end up with free cash, which is money we tax people on but don't use for a variety of reasons, whether healthcare didn't cost as much, someone retired and we had some overflow funds. And then we take that and then we spend that money typically at the end of the year too to balance books, create more projects. But at some point in time, and there's no community in this world that can fully maintain their size of the community, because it just is, there's not enough dollars. When 80% of our budget is salary, it leaves a sliver for infrastructure improvements, and yet you got to find that balance in it. And just like in any municipal government, we don't really attack the animal in the room or the gorilla in the room, which is the 80% of the budget. We're going to talk about not being able to increase capital or OPEB, and while those are policy decisions, policy decision is made to be broken at some point in time, and sometimes you're forced. Like this year, you might be forced not to increase OPEB, even though the board voted for that,
Right.
Because financially it's not going to work. So, realistically, the budget seems to be $200,000-$300,000 out of whack, which in the great scheme of things isn't necessarily like a headache. In the reality.
It'll work out. I guess the big question is at whose expense? Somebody, and that's the essence of budget compromise, is somebody doesn't get what they want.
Right.
And if you look at the town side and the general government side, and the select board said we want to fully fund capital, we want to put money into OPEB, and, we want to not raise taxes fully. And you look at the school side that said, we want to have some new initiatives in our educational system. We want all-day kindergarten. Where does it give? And that's, as we say, that's why we're getting the big bucks to come up with that. But ultimately, and the good news is in this town, it comes down to the town meeting, and the people in town get to decide where they want their money spent most effectively. And I think that's the good part.
And we've seen that happen too. So
That's
we
right.
can do all the planning in the world, and you get to town meeting, and a couple hundred folks,
Right.
take care of the budget. So I want to just talk a little bit about, there's some big capital projects that are on the horizon. Okay, so 15 to 20 million for a DPW, pick a number, because that's kind of like up here, the number, and then you have to drill down of where it actually would go, what the remediation, if it moves. The Council on Aging, or Adult Center, whatever we're calling it today, I don't know, I know they had a vote, but I think they voted to have a new building.
Correct.
Not on the site, even though the study recommended being where they are, and add on. And then the schools are looking for a new middle school. So pick a number, like I said, 60, 70, 80, 100 million bucks on, not counting roads, not counting sewers, not counting maintaining the buildings we already have. Any major discussions about that, about where we're going with it and how we're going to handle it?
No, the answer is no. There are no major discussions, although there have been a lot of individual discussions. The issue really is, Paul, that again, the people in town have to decide what their priorities are. The select board clearly is coming forward and saying today that their number one priority has been and continues to be an improved and new DPW facility. I know there's a lot of disagreement over the site for that, and I'm part of that discussion and disagreement. I may not be fully on board with one of the leading sites, but the issue is, do we need a new DPW or not? And I'm on the side of we need a new DPW facility, primarily because, in my opinion, we need it to maintain and protect the investment we have in DPW equipment and materials. We've got, pick a number, $25 to $35 million worth of trucks and materials and things like that, and they're sitting out in the wintertime with sand and salt in them and getting rained on and rusting out, and trucks that should last 8 years are lasting 6 years because they rust too soon, and we can't do maintenance because we have no building mechanic that can, in the middle of a snowstorm, if a snowplow breaks, we've got a guy outside trying to weld in the middle of a snowstorm because there is no inside facility. Things like that, not to mentioning the character of the facility we have. So, I believe that we need an upgraded facility, not a 19th century facility, but a 21st century facility. How we do that and how we pay for it, we need to be smart. So that's my priority. The next step is an adult center. I may fall in a different category from many people on that. But there is a discussion of what do we need to upgrade the facilities in our adult center? Can we upgrade the facility we have, or do we need to build new? And how do we go about doing that? And then there's the schools. I'm not sure that the people in Longmeadow have the appetite to pay for all three of those in rapid succession. I mean, together, they will cost the people in town more than the high school. So, and I say that because our share of the high school is about $44 million, just a tad over that. That added, if I recall, $350 to the average.
On average, right.
On average, the average tax bill. So if you take, building those three facilities are going to be more than $44 million on the town share.
Right.
You're talking another step up of that magnitude or larger on the average tax bill. That's a pretty big step to take.
Right. And we're hitting something called the levy limit. We're not quite there.
Well, let me try to explain that, Paul, for people who don't understand.
And the reason this is important is because once you hit the levy limit, the town of Longmeadow doesn't have the authority to go out and raise taxes. You can't do an override to overcome the levy limit, which was the misconception of some of the people, even on our select board at the time.
Right.
So please go ahead.
So most people in Massachusetts have heard, most residents, they've heard of the Prop 2.5, passed in 1986 or 1983, something like that. It's literally 30 years old now. And it has two provisions. Almost everybody knows the provision that says you can't raise property taxes by more than 2.5% a year. That's not the provision, but people think of it that way. What the provision says is towns can't raise the amount of money they levy, not the tax rate, but the amount of money they levy on equal properties by more than 2.5%. So if we lived in the town of Springfield or Chicopee or even East Longmeadow, where there are new houses being developed, the taxes from those new houses doesn't include, it's of your current tax base, you can raise it 2.5%. Now, town of Longmeadow, we don't have all those new properties.
Right.
So we're limited to that revenue of 2.5%. Other towns, they raise their current taxes 2.5%, and then they have all this additional income from new growth that would add to it. We can't do that. So that's provision one of Prop 2.5, how much you can raise your taxes that you increase. The second provision, which people may not know of, is a provision that says your tax rate, mill rate, dollars per thousand, cannot exceed $25 per thousand of valuation. That is your non-override tax base. So that right now the town of Longmeadow is at 23 and change there. Even though our tax rate is higher than that, some of our tax rate is so-called exempt from Prop 2.5. We've passed an exemption override for the high school bond, for example. Nevertheless, the projections are somewhere between the years 2019 and 2021, if property taxes stay the same, if taxes continue to go up to 2.5% a year, we will hit that $25 tax levy limit, at which point we can't raise taxes at all anymore. And then we got problems.
Right. And so what becomes the shell game, so to speak, and I'm not going to put that on you, but what becomes the shell game in government is then, all right, well, how do you take things out of the current tax rate and put them over on the side? So you set up a enterprise fund, like our water and sewer enterprise funds, which is how you're supposed to set those up, for example, are not part of that $25 tax rate. So we can pay our bills in water and sewer and not affect our tax rate because they get billed out separately. So you'll see things like trash be removed out of it. So it'll still cost the town of Longmeadow a few $100,000 to remove the trash. I'll just pay for it in a separate bill than I would. And so that's one way to do it. We don't, like you said, we don't have that new growth. We don't have a 30 development, housing development, 30 houses coming on every year to help project that. And even if you do that once, it's once, and then you're kind of back in the same boat a little bit. But the reality is that at some point in time, you're going to face that wall in something. Now, property values can go up. That's how it can save us. So if there's a great economy and home values go up, and then you kind of avoid all that. I know when we brought on Glen Meadow as a town, it was built, it generated a lot of tax revenue. It was that new growth that we have. But we're running out of that new growth property, so to speak. There isn't really that much, if any.
Right,
Yeah.
we don't, but you're right. The things that can avert this terrible situation is clearly reevaluation of property taxes upward. We have an obligation to value our properties at their fair market value. So we can't artificially say, oh, everybody's house in Longmeadow went up 20% and great, now we have all this tax capability. We can't do that. But if we do every 3 years a triennial revaluation, and then we do a 10-year true, it's called measure and list, where they go in and actually look at every house. But the triennial evaluation is coming up in 2017 or 2018, and we should get a better handle. That may buy us 2 or 3 or 4 years. I will say that the last triennial evaluation we did, values actually went down in the town, which hurt us even more. And so it literally can go both ways. There's no guarantee that prices always go up in real estate, as we found. There is another alternative. I've kind of looked at this and haven't gotten a lot of traction, and that is you go to the legislature and you say, look, Longmeadow's the only town of 351 in the Commonwealth that's coming up against this. We've got the perfect storm of no growth, a high tax base that we always had, and 100% residential. Can we get exempt from this thing? We've never tried it. We haven't talked about it. Do we want to do that as a town? Do the people in town want to do that, or do the people in town want to say, look, the limit's there, work to the limit?
Right. And then the other alternative is to bring in other sources of income, which leads me to my next thing, which is a adopted child of yours, which is the streetlight purchase. And we've been talking about this for almost 10 years now in town. I mean, it started out of a little task force that we had about energy, and it kind of bubbled up to where if we actually laid out the money to purchase streetlights, there's a payback period, and then we actually start to save a lot of money in our electric bill. And by a lot, I mean more than 5 or 10% of our current outlay for it. So why don't you talk about that, and then we'll talk about why it's not getting any traction anywhere.
Sure. So
especially when we're coming up against something like a levy limit, but go ahead.
People need to understand that the street lights, which are the things that either hang from a pole or that come up from other poles that light our streets at night, are owned by Eversource. That's the electric company. We pay them 2 bills per month, if you will. The first bill is we lease the lights from them. In some cases, we lease the poles, but in most of the cases, the poles belong to the phone company. They lease the poles from the phone company, and we pay them a lease for the lights. We also pay an electric bill, the actual cost to power the lights on. They're 2 separate bills. The electric bills, interestingly enough, though, aren't based on whether the lights are on or not. They're based on what's called a tariff, which essentially says, that's a 300-watt sodium vapor lamp up there. It's, today is March 2nd. Sunset is at 5:40 p.m. The lights come on at 5:30 p.m. The sun rises at 6 a.m. The lights go off at a certain time, and therefore you're billed for 300 watts for this number of hours on this day, whether the bulb's burned out or running or not. Right. So for folks at home, if you have a burned out street light, call the DPW. We're paying for it whether it's lit or not. Let's get the thing lit. So those are 2 different levy limits. And now we all know that you go into the Brightwood Hardware to buy a light bulb, you can't buy an old incandescent bulb anymore. Right. You're lucky if you can even get a compact fluorescent. Generally, you're going to find an LED to go into your house. They're not putting those in the streetlights now. Why aren't they? Because, my opinion, a little bit of editorializing here, but the electric company needs to sell and use electricity at night. Night's a low demand. They got all these nuclear power plants running. They need to use electricity at night. They don't have a whole lot of incentive when we're paying the bill to put in high efficiency bulbs at night. Now, editorializing may be out of
we'll get them on the record at another point. Yeah.
That's right. But the point here is that if we're paying the bill, we ought to have the right to put in high energy, high efficiency bulbs, but not unless we own them. So the question is, if we bought the lights, first of all, you don't pay rental anymore, and now you have the ability to put in high efficient bulbs in there that reduce your electric bill. my estimate is, there's like $300,000 plus a year in savings at today's cost by doing those two actions. Now, if we can buy the lights, we can structure, because it's up to us, we can structure the bill on that and the bond on that, so the bond costs us $250,000 a year. If we're saving $300,000 a year for the life of the bond, we're still saving $50,000, and then when the bond ends, we really start saving money. The problem is, for us to buy the lights, the electric company's got to be willing to sell the lights. So state law says they've got to be willing to sell the lights, but they've decided the price of the lights is a little bit more than we're willing to pay for it. And it seems that every time we go back and ask them what the price of the lights are, the price goes up some more. And they have, in fact, just a couple of years ago, revised the way they depreciate their lights. And so that the lights went from being just a couple $100,000 to buy to literally tripling in cost. So we're in a situation where the payback period time gets very, very long when they decide it's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy these 40 and 50-year-old lights.
Right. And I'm going to say the but. Here's the but to that argument, is that if, for example, and I supported it on the board, it was one of the top priorities. We actually had a green energy, Long Meadow became a green energy, or green community, which had some grant money. Now, it wouldn't have been enough to buy 100% of the bulb lights, but it was like starter money, seed money for it. Even if, and now again, we're going to potentially hit, or projected to hit a levy limit, which means we're coming to a dead end and we're going 100 miles an hour, and we all know this, except we'll say, we'll worry about the dead end as we get really close to it, right? So even if the price has gone up, and as you said, you could structure a note that says you save 50 grand a year, or you could structure a note that says, it's going to cost 3 years to pay it back, and then we save $300,000 a year, or whatever that number is. So there's many different ways to finance it, but there's really nothing else on the table that says it would bring in $300,000 a year. And how it hasn't become the priority to say, go get it, and now the green energy grant is going to go to something else and whatever. But the bottom line is that it's, regardless of whether that price is tripled, and it's kind of, to me, the issue is we haven't pushed. We've asked, we've talked to, we said, well, we tried, and I'm being collective, I'm not pointing at, but we tried, and it's just not going to work out. But as you and I said, is that if we just tell them we're buying them or get them off our poles, we'll set them up. Because the other thing that can come of it is, at that point in time, you can then do an assessment of, do you have the right lights in town, number one. So maybe they're not all on poles. Number two is that maybe you don't need as many as you have in town. So some streets are pretty well lit, some streets aren't pretty well lit. And so in not an energy audit, but a street light audit about what we really need. I mean, I think in 9 years on the board, I think we had one request to put in a street light, and it was on Frank Smith Road because of a corner. So we haven't changed the location of street lights in years either. So that also gives us the potential of, do we need as many as we have? I just think, and I don't know how you feel about it, but I think that even if you just said, look, we're going to buy them even at today's prices, or go to the DPU, the Department of Public Utilities, and say, we want this price, they want that price, come and help us or whatever, then, or work on it with us to the point where we can get this through, is there still a long-term cost savings on that? So regardless of how long the bond is.
Yeah, you're right, Paul. And the analogy is something we did do in town. We were leasing a fiber optic system from Verizon,
right.
And we determined that we'd put in our own fiber optic system. And the analogy is just ideal. We could in fact structure this that says save a little money now, and down the road we save a lot of money. I think part of it is resources, part of it is this, we're not going to let the electric company double the fee or whatever it is, and some of it is the initiative and drive of who's pushing this and how far we push it. From my perspective, finding a way that we can save money on an expense that's and not cut back services would be a great approach.
And I'm not saying it's a home run, but it's a solid triple, and you come in on the very next play. So it's as close as you can get to a perfect scenario of how to reduce the impact or expenses on the town residents, and do something better. I mean, because like you said, first of all, becoming a green community, I mean, there's an incentive there to go in there and replace them with LEDs. So the total electric bill is, good for the world, all that other good stuff that goes with it. We got a few minutes left. So what else do you think that's, site and DPW is going to be a massive undertaking in the sense of it is a town-wide project. And before the high school was built and committee put together, it was the #1 priority in town, facility-wise. And there's no doubt, wherever the facility goes, there's no doubt that what we have, and it's shameful that we haven't improved it over the years, but there's no doubt that that has to be replaced in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, there is now a formal task force. It's called the Select Board Chartered Task Force, if you will. It's a DPW Building Committee Task Force.
Yep.
They're going to take another look at the assumptions based on where we cited. I have every confidence that they're going to be listening to the people in town, and we're going to end up with a high-class facility in the right place. I have no doubt about that. I just hope that we can get the town's support to understand that, the DPW is every bit as important as our high school. And when I talk to people, I say, look, without a top-notch DPW facility, the schools are going to be closed from the first snowfall till the snow melts, because we won't have the ability to plow the streets properly, or either that or they're going to have all kinds of snow days because we're still not going to be able to do it well. I think we need to support the DPW and the infrastructure that they bring to the support that they bring to the town.
And we've had a changeover in staff where we've had retirements in over the last couple of years and so forth. And the reality is it's the second largest department in town. But it does literally, no disparage in police and fire, but it literally does the most important work in town. It takes away our waste, it brings us water, it takes care of our streets, our parks, and everything else. And like you said, if there was I think the concern is, where is it going to go, how much it's going to be, and I think that's the stuff that can be worked out.
And Paul, you called it because, we estimate a third of the town, of the households in town have children who use the school system. You use the police, you certainly love the police's services and you use them when you need them, you want them. Same with fire and ambulance. But everybody uses the DPW every day. We've got maybe 50% of the people in town use senior services. Most people, or a lot of them, use the Parks and Rec department, the library, but everybody uses the DPW.
Yeah. Anything else that you want to add about any message you want to get out while we got a few more minutes?
No, I'm pretty good. I think, I clearly want to encourage people to participate in the town government. I think people who are watching this probably are more than normal participate, but let people know what really is going on with the issues in town, whether it's citing a DPW, the town budget that's coming up, which for the first time maybe have some good deal of discussion at town meeting and have people participate in that.
Yep. All right, so folks, I just wanted to let you know that right now, as this is going to air and come out, the budget process is going on. The DPW discussion is obviously a little bit more longer term, meaning it's not going to be decided in a month or two or whatever, and most likely won't be on town meeting. I can't imagine the citing of it would be and that type of thing, but it's both things you really need to pay attention to, especially with the DPW. If you don't really know a lot about it, I'm sure there's information on the town website, but go take a drive down there. It's really, you wouldn't house any other employee there in the town. So just get involved. Elections are coming up in June. Town meeting is in May. And you should be at both. So first, I want to thank Mark for coming in.
Thanks for inviting me, Paul.
I think good information. Get out there. We'll have you back. And folks, thanks for watching The Upside. Have a great day. Thank you.